Emotion, the message, a call for unity. Emotion, the message, a call for unity.
For a long, long time, we've been deceived by the illusion. We're called by different names, and this has served to just confuse us. When all is said and done, to be one's our revolution. We never stand alone.
Hotep. We're going to start this set song off. I'm going to say a few words, and then if anyone have a question or comment, you're more than welcome to put that forth. I thought we should take advantage of this opportunity that we have today to speak some about intelligence, since we finally have some printed copies of the intelligence book, long awaited. And so I'd like to say a few things about it, because you oftentimes hear it said within the spiritual teachings that you cannot become happy, and happiness is not something that you have, it's something that you are, it is your nature. But you don't hear it mentioned much that intelligence is also your nature, and it is. So right away, I've answered what is to the title of the book, The Nature of Intelligence. Intelligence is you. Your nature is intelligence. And you can't become intelligent. It's not an accumulative process. You are intelligence. And in the book, The Nature of Intelligence, what we do is we explore, we examine, and we go on a journey to discover all of the things that serves as obstruction to natural access of the intelligent nature that we are. And that same thing can be said in terms of happiness. If happiness is our nature, but what we are constantly experiencing within our way of relating to people are episodes of sorrow, sadness, anger, greed, attachment, misery, suffering, then that's not our nature. That is something that is a condition that we need to see the falseness of, and in seeing that, happiness abounds. We realize that happiness is within, it's not in anything outside of us. By the same token, intelligence resides within. It's not anything that exists outside of us. No one can make you intelligent. You're already intelligent. What we need to do is just become aware of all of those things that serve as obstructions to us accessing intelligence and being made capable of allowing it to be our guide in all human affairs. And the chief agent for discovering such an intelligence is attention. Just as attention is what we must discipline through the practice of meditation to discover our true self, then that same attention is what allows us to make contact with intelligence and break through this conditioning that is serving as mental complexes, emotional complexes, that's contracting our awareness, that's inhibiting our ability to access intelligence. So intelligence is our nature. It's nothing that you can make You know, it's not accumulative. You're not really even acquiring more knowledge. We're not trying to get more knowledge. As I've said before in a prior sex song, what more is needed is an illumination in the knowledge that you already are. And that's what enlightenment is about. When you are enlightened, there's an illumination, whereas now you can see things as they are and not how they appear in illusions. So we're not trying to accumulate more and more knowledge. It's not about that. It's more about trying to really attune to the naturalness of our beingness and allow that to express in our life and living. And when it expresses as such, then we are happy and we are at peace and we live intelligent lives. So with that said, if anyone has a question or would like to add a comment, we can take it from there and see where it goes, because in a way, that is how the intelligence book came into being. It's a transcription of dialogues that we had some years ago. And it's an extraordinary work, literary work, I must say.
And I agree. Hotep, I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, pardon me. And I hold in my hand The Nature of Intelligence, A Look Beyond Mere Thinking by Wane Sabermurti Gentry. And I have in the studio the author of this book, Wane Sabermurti Gentry. Hotep, tell us about this book. I will just say that the thing that makes it so easy to read and to understand is that in the introduction, you give people an idea of what they will encounter. Mm-hmm. So please, go ahead.
Thank you again for having me as your guest. It's always a pleasure. The Nature of Intelligence is a book that is a transcription of a series of dialogues that a group of spiritual seekers and practitioners had some years ago, in which I facilitated those dialogues. It's like a journey to discover what is the nature of intelligence. And it's a self journey, because in that journey we find out that intelligence is our nature, that we are intelligent. And so the task becomes finding out what are the obstacles, what are the conditioning factors that gets in the way and restrict our awareness and our access to the natural intelligence that we are. And so in that book, we journey through all of the different things that serve as obstructions, and we talk about the means by which we can see the falseness of how we become conditioned to think in certain ways that restrict our access to our intelligence. And we go into areas of talking about savant abilities. We talk some about insight, and we mention Helen Keller and how she had an extraordinary insight which led her to developing the concept of language in the midst of her severe disabilities, not being able to see, not being able to hear, not being able to speak. But yet, with her extraordinary teacher, Anne Sullivan, she was able to get a concept of language and by way of touch. And once she got that, her mind just really opened up, had an insight. And then that took her to extraordinary levels. And if my memory served me right, I believe she was the first woman to receive an honorary doctorate from Harvard University. So she excelled. She eventually wrote books. She eventually gave speeches in monotone that was with the aid of someone helping her, but she was an extraordinary person. So she gets mentioned in the book as relates to having insight, because all of us have these extraordinary insight abilities. And then we talk some about thoughts and the power of illusions and how we can misrepresent certain things to ourselves and be guided by that, and then that it restricts our natural access to our intelligence. So it's interesting because I've had a number of people who have purchased the book, and their beginning remarks and comments was that, well, I'm going to, I want to support you, so I will buy a book. And then later on, these same persons come back to me and say, oh, the book is really something else. They express how much the book has become a support, a means of support to their life. And that it is a very personal work because there's a lot of emotions that's next to the intellectual journeying to discover intelligence, and it is felt as you read the book, I must say.
Well, I have an older edition of the book, and the thing that that caused me to recommend it to people is because people tend to confide in me. And when they confide in me, rather than give them advice about how to approach a problem on a superficial level, I thought that I might as well give them something that will enable them to go to the source, so that not only could they look at this particular problem in a certain perspective, but they could also look at other problems as they present themselves with that same perspective, and certainly to use this as a reference. But we are not accustomed usually to using intelligence as a pronoun for a person. In other words, you are intelligence, which is different from you are intelligent, because when somebody says you're intelligent, generally they mean you are well spoken, perhaps you are well read, perhaps you are well educated, and so forth and so on. And so that tends to leave one with the impression that if you are not well educated and well read and well spoken, that you have no intelligence. But you're saying intelligence is who we are, and it is not something that is cumulative. I love that you say it is not something that you get more and more of the more you study, the more you go to school, the more educated you become. You gain, you weigh more, you heavier. But the intelligence is the basis of who you are. And to know that intelligence is who you are, that happy is who you are, means that when you ground yourself in that, then you say, if this is sorrow, this is false, because this is not authentic. So I like the parts into which you have divided this book, because it helps people to know. You start out by talking about what is intelligence. So why don't you talk about that now?
Okay.
Intelligence, you say, as security.
Right. That's interesting because we gave an example of intelligence so that it can be seen in its presence, in its omnipresence, that it always is. How sometimes in exploring, you may ask, well, what is security? Because we all need security. Self-preservation, the first law of nature, preserving ourselves, and that involves in some form, way of fashion, security. We need security. And then you may ask the question, well, is there security in relationships? There no security, lasting, everlasting security in relationships because things come into being, they come out of being. They're transient. They're impermanent. Relationships are impermanent. Is there security on the job? In finance, you can be hired today and fired tomorrow. There's no lasting security in things that you can obtain and have. Possessions, right. And in our exploration, then the question was asked, well, is there security in the world? You know, well, there's no security in relationships, no security in jobs. You know, where does security lie? And this led us to see very actively how security lies in the intelligence that is seeing all the areas and all the things that are insecure. That's where your security lies, because you're seeing where things you cannot invest in because they're not going to last. You're seeing where you can't have false hope about things being a certain way because they're not the way you think they are. That seeing cuts through, and that seeing is intelligence. And so we kind of showed how that security is something that is always there and it's inherent. It's not something that you obtained. It's something that was revealed to you by seeing the falseness of the things that are transient, the things that are insecure, the things that can harm you. And so it's like a beholding of itself, where you see that I am this intelligence, seeing all of these things that are insecure. And that's just one example. There are many other examples where you can see how you are intelligent. You can see how in your learning experience that certain relationships in their ordered way of how they function and how they exist are made intelligible to you through how you recognize patterns. And that's intelligence operating in that sense. And in knowing that, and that's one of the ways that the medicinal properties of certain plants are recognized also, by noticing certain structures of those plants, certain colorations, certain patterns, and learning certain things of the plants. Now, that's a beholding of an intelligence that is recognizing in the way the plant is and how the nature of the plant. That's active intelligence, and that's not anything that is coming from outside of you. It is inside of you. It's something that is coming from the inside.
So you use active, so obviously the other part, the other side of that would be dormant, that there is active intelligence, intelligence that is in fact engaged in the now, and then there's the dormant intelligence that is there but is not yet engaged.
Right.
An example of what you just said is Dr. George Washington Carver. My godfather was his lab assistant. And my godfather told me that he would go into trance, and he told him that he talked to plants, and plants told him what their properties were. So he had developed, not in the sense of speaking, you know, plants don't have mouths and vocal cords, but in the sense that there was a communication between himself and vegetation that enabled him to see patterns and relationships and powers, if you care, to use that medicinal properties, so that he was able to recognize many, many more possibilities from a single plant, like a sweet potato or a peanut, which was, it bothers me when people try to reduce him to having discovered a lot of things made out of the peanut or made out of the potato. He could in fact reconstruct the world of phenomena from vegetation. He could make a frame a canvas, the paints, the paintbrushes, and paint the picture. He could do so many things that there were things that he created because of his understanding, his insight, that he was taken to DuPont Laboratory and other such places because he came up with synthetic substances that replaced rubber. And many of the things that he created were simply shelved and never put into production because they would ruin entire industries if they were used. So he recognized himself, and his active intelligence engaged that aspect of the world and made him a genius, and that's a word that's overused, but made him excelled far beyond what most human beings can do.
Right. And that's one of the things that having that active intelligence, what it's capable of doing, because intelligence also allows you to get the greater efficiency and the greatest utility of something. He was able to use things in a variety of ways. That is intelligence. And that is made possible through the disciplining of attention. Now, he was able to attend in ways far beyond the ordinary, but it is dormant within us all that we can attend to those extraordinary degrees. And the fascinating thing about attention is one of the other things that we explore in the book. We talk about what is attention, is that when you give attention, you're making commitments to get involved. And whatever you pay attention to responds to you. There's a response. Dr. Carver was able to pay attention to those plants, and there was a response from the plants, a literal response at the vibratory level, at the etheric level, at levels that beyond conception, where there was a communion. And then he was able to, do extraordinary things, and it happens by virtue of his attention, which gave him an insight. Attention is what also enables you to have such an insight. And the insight is like having a perception of the whole, being able to see the wholeness of something. And in the book, we talked about how it is this insight, which is a perception of the whole, that allows for this intelligence to now flow from that wholeness. That this whole, as wholeness and as a whole, can also be looked at as a gap. In the Eastern teachings, you come in contact with an understanding that references a gap that exists. Sometimes used the term as a bardo. It's a in between, it's a connection. Now, what's interesting about this is that the definition of intelligence in its etymology, intellegere, enters between, and legere is to choose or to pick or to read. And this is why we say the nature of intelligence also involves reading between the lines. To be able to be in that gap, which connects all things, which makes them all whole. And insight is what reveals to you that gap, that perception of the whole, through which intelligence now is made access. And once this intelligence becomes active now, you're taken to much, much deeper levels of knowing and meaning, which is again within yourself. It's not a knowledge that has come from outside of yourself. It is knowledge that has been educere, it's been evoked. It is a knowledge that is a knowing that is dormant, but now has become active and revealed because attention given in such a disciplined way, which moved to a point of having an insight, which then now allow for this intelligence to come through, which is the same thing that happened, as we mentioned in the book, to Helen Keller, because she was given attention to Anne Sullivan, her teacher, who was placing her hand in running water. And then she made the sign for water in Helen Keller's hand. And then she placed her hand in standing water and made the same sign. And this was puzzling Helen Keller, because she was wondering, now, my experience of this is that this is something moving and this is something that is stationary, but yet the same name is being applied to it. And something clicked in her brain, and she was able to have an insight into the concept of language. And once that happened, she began to really expand in her awareness of her inner and her outer environment, and began to communicate with much more precision. And I believe the title of the movie that documented her story was called The Miracle Worker, which did a pretty good job. But the attention and the insight and intelligence, we kind of go into that in the book, and how it's all connected, and that it all points to the fact that it is of your nature. It is something that is natural to you, and that whenever you find yourself having experiences of something that is what you may call to be unintelligent, it's because you have given attention in ways that have become conditioned and restricted and contracted. And that's all. It's not that you're not intelligent, you're just not paying right attention. And some things that you have paid attention to, you've been misinformed. It's not the right, proper knowledge, what it is that you need to know.
You know, you make me think about improvisation in that regard, because the human being is intelligence. When the need presents itself for something that is absent from the environment, very often our people would improvise that thing out of things that were seemingly unrelated to the problem, would do what we call make a way out of no way. That may be what we're facing now when we talk about community preparedness.
Yes. Yeah, it's a way out of no way. When it seems that there's nothing can be done, something comes forth. And it's interesting because, see, spontaneity is the liveness. Life is very spontaneous. It's very much in the moment. It's not preconceived. And intelligent is always in the moment. It comes forth. And it's revelatory. Where there seemed to be no solution, all of a sudden, eureka is there. It comes. And it is the perfect solution. And we also get these eureka experiences of intelligence surging through in very much the same, as you say, as improvisational ways. And it's interesting that I'm having problems saying that word, and me being a musician.
That's what I was going to say. You're a musician.
I'm a musician, and I'm very much into improvisation. But it's a natural thing that comes through. Spontaneity, being able to improvise. It's of the nature of intelligence to just come through. And it happens when we are relaxed, very relaxed. And this is where meditation has a very good benefit in bringing forth intelligence, because it is a relaxing practice. Not just relaxing in physical ways, but in psychological and emotional also. Because when there's great relaxation, then now energy can flow unimpeded. And one of the things we mentioned also in the book, and we talked about some of the people who exhibited extraordinary intelligence. And Albert Einstein, when he came up with his theory of relativity, he was very relaxed. He was gardening. He was not expending a whole lot of energy at the board trying to really figure out what it is that needs to be understood with this theory. It came through, was a breakthrough while he was very, very relaxed. And if you read the biographies of many of these extraordinary scientists and mystics, they will talk about these very relaxed moments where there was a breakthrough and then there was contact made with this intelligence that is universal, that is all inclusive. And as I said in the excerpt that preceded our talk, how it's not mentioned much about the nature of ourselves being intelligence. When you study the wisdom teachings of the sages, you hear a lot about it being our nature as being happy and blissful, and that we all are in search for happiness, and that happiness exists within. Well, we also are in search for knowing in an all-knowing sense. We all want to know. And that is our nature. Intelligence is our nature. I'm reminded of the Sanskrit term that is a description of the subjective experience of the ultimate reality is Satchitananda. And Sat means real, truth, and your total beingness. Chit is total consciousness, all knowing. And Ananda is bliss, total happiness. That is our nature. The middle one, Chit, is where the intelligence is, that all knowing. Because to have total knowledge and all knowing, that is the function and the evidence of intelligence. So we go into that in the book, and we even reference the prototype personification of intelligence, which is Tahuti. Our ancient African ancestors personified intelligence as Tahuti, the inventor of writing, the inventor of language, the inventor of everything that makes life enjoyable, conventional, spiritually reflective, artistic, creative, comes from Tahuti. And Tahuti is the personification of intelligence. And we all have that intelligent Tahuti faculty within our nature. We just have to learn how to discipline our attention and then have an insight which will allow for that to express itself in our life.
I live in relationship to active intelligence. As you know, I have a child who is a sculptor. And sometimes when I see what she has done, I am just overwhelmed, because I ask myself, how does she do this? Given the fact that she has no formal training, and given the fact that she was an adult with children when she took an interest in art in any way. But her ability to pay attention is probably unparalleled, because she sees so many things simultaneously. She will mention, you will both be in the same place, and she will mention about a dozen things that are going on there. And she will know the relationship between those things. And you say, well, where? You know, you see her just behave in that way. But the thing is, how do you know how to create this thing that does not exist anywhere? How do you know how to do that? And that is because she surrenders herself. She surrenders her attention. She will stay up overnight, more than one night in a row, working on something. And sometimes she will be late delivering something. And I've come to understand that she cannot be bound by time, because she is giving it all the time that there is to give it. When it comes, it comes. She is there, she is available, she is attending, she is working, and she is reworking until she has what it is that somewhere in her intelligence this is. So you see that people can do that. You know, you see that people can activate their intelligence, and with their intelligence they can do remarkable things. And there has been no training. There's been no instruction. They have reached somewhere deep inside themselves, and they have come up with this thing that you see before you. The same thing with musicians.
Exactly.
You know, where does the music come from?
It comes from them. It is an expression of themselves. That's where it is. And it's interesting because, as I said earlier, how when you pay attention, you're making a commitment to get involved. Now, there is also a higher attending that exists that we can, in ways that we can attend, whereas you're not getting involved, you're witnessing. It is a very high form of attending. And artists are operating at the level of witnessing, and much of what comes out is revelatory. Me speaking personally as a musician, when I write songs, I'm in that witnessing level, whereas I'm not constructing the song reveals itself. I hear it, the melodies, the harmonies, and all I do is give form to it and structure through the chord formations and the melodies that are available to me by the instrument that I'm playing, if it's, in this sake, a piano. But there's a witnessing that is taking place that is in a higher attending, and this is what is happening in with Deborah, and that she's attending at a higher level, which most people are not at. They're not actively at that level. So now there are revelations of forms, art, sounds, shapes, colors. And it's a joyful, blissful experience because, again, it's a deeper, higher level of your own self that's being revealed to you. You are one with your art. You don't see any separation between you and your art, be it music or be it sculpture, be it painting. And it's a very, very joyful, complete feeling. Whereas most artists, they don't want to eat. They don't want to sleep. They don't want anything but to behold the radiance of what it is that is emanating from the depths of their being in that moment. They're in total communion with the inner recesses of their inner being at levels that is blissful, that is peaceful, and that is lasting also.
That shows us what is possible. When you see this kind of behavior, then you know that's human behavior. That's a human being doing that. Now, you may not have the same interest or the same alignment with music or with sculpture or with painting or with writing, but somewhere inside of your intelligence is something that is available to be activated and expressed.
Exactly. And the point you're making is definitely something that is missing in our children's learning experience, because they're being labeled as not starting off with intelligence, that you got to learn these formulas. You got to get these rules.
You have low
down.
IQs.
Right. You have a low IQ. We have to now accumulate this information, and in that way, you're going to become intelligent. It's not about illuminating the knowledge that you already have, that you already are, so that you can see clearly more of who you already are. It's about being informed about data, facts, and figures. And then the more I accumulate that, that serves as my knowledge. And now I'm intelligent. But the fallacy of that, and this is something that we also mentioned in the book as we explored in these dialogues of discovering the nature of intelligence, the fallacy of that is that when you look in the lives of people who have accumulated so much knowledge, there's no harmony. There's no coherence. There's no integrity in how they feel, think, act, express. There's contradiction. There's conflict. So that's not intelligence. That's not your nature, because those things would have you experience sorrow, suffering, anger, greed, attachment, even in the midst of all this knowledge, so-called information that you've accumulated. So intelligence is harmonizing. It balances. It cuts through. It's clear. It's connected to the bliss, that like the Satchitananda, the bliss and the Sat, and being aware of your total beingness, you're completely at peace, which is something that we also are in search of, thinking that it's something that's going to be outside. Peace resides within. And coming to an awareness of your total beingness, you are at peace, because conflict can only exist where there's division, because there have to be an adversary, something you are opposed to. That's contradiction, conflict. But when there's an understanding that your beingness is omnipresent, is non-local, then there's nothing for you to be in conflict and war with. So you're peaceful. And you're happy when you are in communion with the essence of your real self, because you have total contentment. You're not lacking anything. There's abundance. So you're not craving and desiring and feeling that there's a need for something for you to union with because you feel incomplete. You're total. So you're happy, you're full. And we see this in the natural play of children, spontaneous. They improvise a lot too, as they're playing, they're doing all kinds of things. It's just a natural expression of themselves. They're not worried about anything. They're not thinking in concepts of time and trying to meet this deadline. They're not feeling challenged about anything. So they just run about and laugh, and they imagination is just flowing. And that childlike enjoyment of life, somehow it gets lost when we become adults. Even the word adult in some sense signifies that, or represents it in a way when you say adultery, that is something that's a loss of innocence, and moving from a child to adult, which is something that's not supposed to happen in its natural way of moving from becoming a child in terms of your physical and emotional and mental makeup, and then becoming mature physically, emotional, and mental. We're not supposed to lose that innocence and that child wonderment and that enjoyable expression of living spontaneously in the moment and being happy. when we see that we have become adults and we're not living that way, then we're becoming more attached to conventional ways of living that have been superimposed on our nature. And these are the obstructions and the conditioning factors that we talk some about in the book. And that in seeing this, all we need to do is become capable of seeing it, because in the seeing of it, there's a revelation of its falseness. It cannot stand under the eye of intelligence. You see it. Oh, okay, there's a trick going on here. There's something that's not right. And as soon as you see that, you cease to follow it. You cease to believe it. And then it falls away, and now there's a revelation of what has always been there, except for it being veiled by something that you seeing falsely.
I was almost tempted to use the phrase, we are taught to live for the city, or taught to live according to the social norms, but conditioning is better. It's better because we are conditioned to confine ourselves to personalities and roles, and conditioned to withhold true expressions of ourselves in order to please people who must be pleased, or we will suffer from their displeasure. So just think about the conditioning that you underwent before you, quote, matured, you know, as a young person, for example, and even more so as a captive, you know, as the tool of someone who wanted to exploit your attributes for their profit and pleasure. Then certain things were emphasized. It's like making human beings into caricatures, you know, making them develop more along this line, because we need more brute strength from you. We need more ability to reproduce. We need more reproduction. We need more labor. We don't necessarily need you to think,
Right.
or to create. So that kind of conditioning is kind of like, I may have heard you use this metaphor, but it's like restraining a baby elephant with a rope, so that once it accepts that confinement, that even when it's a full mature adult and could easily pull that stake up out of the ground and walk away with it, does not, because of its conditioning.
Because it made that commitment.
Right,
That conditioning commits you.
Right.
And that's very, very important, because there needs to be clarity in our understanding of the difference between conditioning and teaching, because you are not taught a certain way, which ends up in you doing things improperly. If you're doing something not properly, then you haven't been taught. You've been misinformed. And that misinforming is a conditioning. And conditioning is a very appropriate word too, because it means to bring to a desired state for a particular usage. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're not teaching you anything. They're bringing you and your abilities and what you have to offer for what they want to use you and exploit you for. They're bringing you to a desired state so that you can be used in this capacity. See, teaching and education and even instruction, those words are always proper and positive, and learning. So When you learn something, you've been taught. And when you have been taught something, you've been properly informed. And when you're properly informed, and what is being informed is your knowledge base, then you have received education. Because it's all about giving structure to the knowledge that you already are, except that your attention may not be aligned in the way that is needed for you to see and know. So this to teach is connected to properly being informed. When you're improperly informed, you are being conditioned. And that's what the vast majority of people are suffering from in institutions that are claiming themselves to be learning institutions, but they're not learning. They're being conditioned so that they can be brought to a desired state to be used in particular ways in accordance with the people who have established the institutions to serve the purpose of profit. Because the mentality of the society that builds such institutions do not know, have no clear understanding what it really means to be a human being. We have all kind of presumptions that we bring as an understanding in our conversations and our way of relating to people as it relates just to our human beingness. As you were saying earlier, they don't want you to think. That's restricting your humanity. They don't want you to feel a certain way. They don't want you to create anything. That's restricting your humanity. So you're being conditioned. You're not learning anything. You're not expressing yourself. Human beings are creative. We are knowing. We are loving. We are peaceful. And these are natural expressions of a person who have come into an awareness of their essential nature. And when this is not being seen in the lives of those who are establishing relationships, who are living in societies, then they have not been subjected to a real enculturation process that would ensure the growth of people as they move through levels so that they can now express their humaneness, their humanity across all levels of the spectrum of their being.
You know, you would almost be able to say that the only way to thrive, to survive, is to be increasingly more human. Because if you are operating at in a robotic way, you cannot solve the challenges that come before you if they are not known. You know, if they are not a part of your experience, if something from without your experience, a crisis, for example, a deprivation of a kind that you have never experienced, you cannot improvise, you cannot create, you cannot make a way out of no way if you don't know that that is who you are.
Right.
If you are not invested in your true self, you cannot survive as a product of conditioning. Because you certainly have a shelf life if you are a product.
Exactly. You objectified yourself. And you definitely have a shelf life. And it's interesting because your humanity, when you say increasingly more humane. This is exactly what we're supposed to be doing with our attention. We're supposed to be giving attention in ways that would help us to discover our humanity on levels that are all inclusive, the totality of our beingness, of how we feel, how we think, how we act, what our perceptions are, across the wholeness of our beingness. But this gets misguided. Our attention gets misguided when it is directed to false information down improper avenues. And this is why there's really no maturation process of a human being that's going to take place absence of a culture. And culture, of course, exists in three dimensions. There's the deep structure, core structure, and the surface structure. And I know we don't have time for the elaboration of them.
I'm just watching you because I know that you can dive and you can stay underwater. And I don't want people to lose sight of the fact that there is a book called The Nature of Intelligence, A Look Beyond Mere Thinking, and the author is Wani Sabermurti Gentry. And if you're interested in obtaining a copy of the book, of course, you can always contact me. And my telephone number is 708-257-7325. And I will give you information about how to acquire this book. And if I were you, I would not only read this book, but I would also have other people in a study group with me, because I think these ideas are, you know, when I say community preparedness, it's armor time. I'm not talking just about the armor of what you shall eat, what you shall drink, what you shall cover yourself. But we've got to have the whole armor, as the Bible says, the whole armor of God. You've got to have that internal armor to get through real challenges, emergencies, crises, whatever you want to call them, because they do come. We have seen them. And I think that, you know, having this kind of armor is essential, which is why this is part 2 of community preparedness, is armor time, because I know that it takes more than just information, but it takes knowing thyself and knowing these kinds of things. And I thank you for being my guest.
Thank you so much for having me as your guest. I've enjoyed our dialogue.
I just can't tell you how much I enjoy this book.
When all is said and done, to be one's our revolution. We never stand alone, 'cause unity's our resolution.
Umoja is the message, a call for you.